waiting for something bad to follow. She had no horse, no family, no plan. She passed a broken fence, then another. A blackbird called from a leaning post. Wind stirred the tall grass, and then, just over a rise, she saw dust curling in the distance. A rider. She stepped back, heart pounding. Her fingers curled around the edge of her bundle like it could do anything to protect her. The man came closer, tall in the saddle, his shirt open at the throat and his hat low. His horse slowed when he saw her, and he pulled up a few yards away. "You all right, miss?" he asked, voice rough but not unkind. Gracelyn didn't answer. He eased off the saddle. Dust coated his boots and the hem of his faded trousers. He was lean, sunburnt, and wore a pistol on his belt like he knew how to use it but would rather not. "My name's Zeke Alder," he said, keeping a soft tone. "I ride fence for the McCallum Ranch about 5 miles west. Ain't much, but I got water and shade back that way. Looks like you could use both." Gracelyn's jaw was tight. "I do not need help," he nodded, slow. "All right, but I ain't leaving you out here either." A long silence. Then, with hands stiff and tired, she held out the bundle. "I have nothing to trade." Zeke didn't take it. Wasn't asking for anything. Something in his face, worn but steady, made her shoulders sag. He led her to his horse, didn't touch her, just offered a hand. She stared at it like she hadn't seen a kind hand in years. Then, after a breath, she took it. His calloused fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. He helped her up behind the saddle, careful not to jostle her too much. She kept still, holding onto the edge of the saddle horn, not him. They rode in silence. The prairie stretched wide and golden on all sides, the sky a hard, endless blue. Zeke's horse, a tired gelding named Rabbit, moved slower with 2 riders, but steady. By the time they reached his little camp, tucked under a bluff of cottonwoods near a narrow creek, Gracelyn was barely upright. Zeke helped her down, handed her his canteen, and gestured toward a patch of shade. She drank deep, then sat with her back against a tree, legs folded beneath her. Zeke crouched nearby, not too close. "You hurt." She looked down at the dried blood on her sleeve. "Not bad. You got a name?" She hesitated. "Gracelyn," he nodded. "All right, Gracelyn, I got beans on the fire. You can eat, rest some. Then when you're ready, you can tell me what you need." That night, after she'd eaten and washed her hands in the creek, she sat across from him by the low fire. She barely spoke. Zeke didn't press. He watched her, though. The way her eyes moved, always scanning the dark. The way she flinched at certain sounds. She moved like someone who'd spent too long waiting for something to go wrong. "I had a husband," she said finally, her voice low. "He died last winter, fever." Zeke nodded once. "We were headed for Oregon, got as far as Dodge, then he got sick. After he passed, I stayed. Too long. Somebody offered me work, said it was cleaning. It was not." Zeke's jaw tensed. "You ran, I walked," she said. "No one noticed." Zeke looked straight at her. "You are safe now." She stared into the fire. "No such thing." He did not answer. He kept the fire low and stayed awake long after she fell into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of a pan sizzling. Zeke handed her a tin plate with beans and cornbread. She took it, murmured a thank you. They stayed 2 more days by the creek. She bathed, mended her dress, and rested. Zeke gave her space but always stayed close enough. On the 3rd morning, she stood near the water, braid loose down her back, skirts damp at the hem. She looked at him square. "I cannot stay here." Zeke folded his arms. "You got somewhere else to be?" "No," she admitted, "but I will not be anyone's burden." "You are not," he said. "But if you need work, McCallum's always looking for help in the kitchen. You're sharp, he would take you on." She studied him. "And you?" "I ride fence, fix gates. Break horses sometimes. Not much of a life, but it is mine." Gracelyn turned back to the water. "All right, I will come." The ride was quiet again. But this time she held the saddle less tight. When they reached the ranch, McCallum gave her a long look, then nodded. "You can start in the morning. Zeke says you work hard. That is good enough for me." Zeke helped her settle into the bunkhouse, separate from the men's. She stood at the doorway, looking out at the open land. "You meant it," Gracelyn said. "You gave me your hand, but you wanted nothing in return." Zeke tipped his hat back. You needed help, that was enough. She looked at him, really looked. You are kind, Zeke Alder, he shrugged. You are strong, Gracelyn Monroe. A smile touched her mouth, not full, not bright, but real. In the weeks that followed, she worked quiet and steady. She did not flinch as much. She slept better. Zeke kept riding fence, but he always checked the kitchen window when he passed. One afternoon, she brought him water in the field. He took it, drank, then looked at her, eyes soft. You ever think about staying? He asked. I am, she said. Right here. He reached for her hand again, this time slower, gentler, and she did not pull away. Gracelyn emptied the last basin of dishwater into the dry weeds behind the kitchen lean-to and wiped her hands on her apron. The morning shift left her arms aching, but her posture remained tall. The cook, a sharp-tongued woman named Mavis, had already gone to lie down, leaving the back steps quiet for the first time that day. Across the yard, Zeke moved slow and deliberate beside the corral, mending a length of split rail. His sleeves were rolled and a strip of cloth hung around his neck, damp with sweat. He hadn't seen her yet. She crossed the yard, boots crunching on the packed dirt. He looked up only when she passed through the gate. You ever fix something that just won't stay fixed? She asked, nodding toward the half-bent rails. Zeke leaned on the hammer and wiped his brow with his wrist. Every day, fence don't care if you're tired. She crouched beside him and picked up a dropped nail. This post's rotted out at the base. You'll need to cut it back and reset it. He raised an eyebrow. You know fence? No, she said, but I've watched you enough to see what don't hold. He gave a quiet chuckle and set the hammer down. You always watch that close. I don't miss much, she said. Not anymore. Zeke picked up the handsaw, tested the teeth, then handed it to her. You want to try it? She hesitated, then took it. The blade was heavier than she expected. She fitted against the weak part of the post and began to saw slow and even. Zeke crouched beside her without offering correction. The post gave way sooner than she expected, and she rocked back onto her heels, breathing hard. He offered a nod. That's good work. She brushed her hands on her skirt. I used to think I wasn't made for labor. What changed your mind? She looked at the splintered wood. The world didn't give me a choice. They stood, and he reached into his shirt pocket, pulling out a small tin of salve. You've gone and blistered your palm. I've had worse. Still, he said, unscrewing the lid. Let me. She held out her hand. His touch was careful, fingers steady as he rubbed the salve into her skin. She didn't flinch. Where'd you get this? She asked, motioning to the tin. A patchy woman near Cimarron taught me to make it, said cracked skin's just an invitation for worse things. She teach you anything else? Trust, he said. Took her 3 visits before she'd even speak to me. Gracelyn watched him, the way his gaze stayed low, focused on her hand. You waited, she said. I always do. She stepped back when he finished, tucking the tin into her apron pocket. I'm not used to that. Zeke picked up the saw again. I know. She turned toward the bunkhouse, then paused. There's something I want to show you. He followed her past the stable, down a narrow trail lined by dust-covered sage. Behind a low rise lay a stand of plum trees, their fruit not yet ripe but heavy on the boughs. I come here when I need quiet, she said. Nobody else knows it's here. He ran a hand along a low branch. You ever pick them? Only once. The birds get most. Zeke settled on a flat stone, elbows on his knees. Why show me? She sat across from him, legs tucked beneath her. Because you don't talk to fill the air. A breeze stirred the leaves above them. He looked at her, eyes steady, voice low. You still looking to leave? She shook her head. Not anymore. His jaw shifted just slightly. What changed your mind? I'm not waiting to be chased now. I go to sleep knowing I'll wake up where I belong. Zeke looked away toward the sun dipping behind distant cottonwoods. I don't offer much. You offer steady, she said. That's more than I ever had. They sat until the sky turned amber and the wind cooled. As they walked back, their arms brushed once. Neither pulled away. Gracelyn lifted the hem of her skirt and stepped into the barn's shadow, blinking at the shift in light. The air inside was warm with hay and quiet, save for the soft clatter of hooves from the far stall. Zeke stood beside a young sorrel, checking its leg with a kind of patience that asked nothing in return. She waited until he looked up. "I've been offered a room above the kitchen," she said. "Mavis says it's empty and dry and the roof don't leak." Zeke eased back onto his heels. "You thinking of taking it?" She nodded once. "I reckon it's time I stop sleeping with my boots on." He didn't smile, just touched the brim of his hat in silent agreement, then turned back to the horse. She watched his hands move slow, careful, practiced, the kind of touch that didn't startle. "I used to think people like you were made up," she said. He glanced over. "What kind's that? The kind who don't ask what you cost." Zeke ran his palm down the horse's flank. "That ain't kindness, that's just decent." "My father wasn't," she said, voice flat. "He'd trade a promise like it was tobacco and leave you with nothing in your hand but ash." Zeke didn't speak. He gave her the space to keep going or not. "He sold our land in Tennessee to a man who never paid," she continued, "then left us to patch the roof with flour sacks. My mother died before she ever saw a bed without holes in the quilt." Zeke braced his arms on the stall gate. "You were the oldest." "Only," she said. "Buried her myself behind the last row of corn, then I left." She stepped closer, boots scuffing the packed dirt. "I didn't tell you that for pity." "I didn't hear it that way," he said. She reached over the gate and touched the horse's neck. "I still get sick when I hear a man raise his voice." Zeke nodded. "Then I'll keep mine low." They stood quiet for a while. The horse shifted, tail twitching, but didn't spook under her hand. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. He picked up a brush, offered it to her. She took it, ran it gently along the gelding's shoulder. "Sometimes," he said. "But only since you came." She looked at him then, straight on. "I can't offer much." Zeke leaned his weight on the stall gate. "You offer yourself, that's everything." Her breath caught just once, then settled deep. "I've been sleeping with a knife under my pillow for near a year," she said. "But last night I left it in the drawer." Zeke stepped around the stall, stopping in front of her, not close enough to crowd. "You're not the only one who's had to learn how to breathe again." She reached up, fingertips grazing the edge of his jaw. "This ain't a dream, is it?" "No," he said. "Dreams don't hold your hand when the wind turns cold." She stepped into him, slow and sure, and he wrapped his arms around her like he'd been waiting a long time to do it. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the cotton and dust, but in the barn, it was only the sound of two people learning to stand still together. The late September light fell soft over the prairie, slanting gold across the hayfields and low stone walls. The days had cooled just enough for the heat to let go of the earth by evening, and the wind carried traces of ash leaves turning along the creek banks. Gracelyn leaned against the barn doorframe, arms crossed over her apron, watching Zeke lead a mule toward the far paddock. He moved with quiet purpose, sleeves rolled to the elbow, one pant leg stained at the knee from kneeling in the river sand earlier that morning. He saw her watching and gave a small nod, then latched the gate before coming over. "You ever help with a harvest?" he asked once he reached her. "Not in years," she said. "We had 3 rows of beans and a crooked patch of squash when I was a girl. Mama said we weren't farmers, just stubborn." Zeke leaned a shoulder against the frame beside her. "We're putting up hay tomorrow. McCallum's got 2 wagons and not enough hands." "Mavis said you've got strong arms." "I'll come," she said. "I don't spook at work." He glanced at her hands. "You'll want gloves and a wide hat if you've got one." She looked toward the bunkhouse. "I've got something that might pass." They stood there a while without filling the air. Zeke shifted first. "I saw your name carved into the back step." Her eyes narrowed. "I didn't want to forget I belonged somewhere. I reckon that's the best reason I've heard." She looked down at the toe of her boot. "When I first got here, I didn't think I'd last a week. You've lasted longer than most." "I was too tired to run again," she said. "Turns out staying takes more strength than leaving." He turned to face her fully. "I've been thinking about building a cabin come spring, just a small one. Near the north ridge where the cottonwoods break the wind." She eyed him, expression unreadable. "That's so. Figured I'd need help cutting the beams, maybe someone to tell me if the door hangs crooked." She crossed her arms tighter. You asking me to check your carpentry? I'm asking if you'd want to make a home with me. Her breath hitched, but she didn't look away. There's no preacher here. I don't need one to know what's right. But if you want to stand before one, we'll ride to the next town over. She stepped forward, close enough for her skirts to brush his leg. I don't want a paper to prove what I already know. Zeke's voice dropped low. And what's that? That I'm not walking away from this, she said. Not from you. He reached for her hand, calloused fingers curling around hers with quiet certainty. Her voice was steady. I'll help you raise that cabin. I'll lay every board myself if I have to. You won't be alone in it, he said. I know. As the sun sank behind the ridge, they stood together with the barn at their backs and the prairie rolling out before them wide, open, and full of promise. The hay was stacked by noon, the last bundles pitched into the loft, and the wagon returned to the shed. Gracelyn peeled off her gloves and flexed her fingers, the skin beneath red and lined with sweat. Zeke was up on the ladder, sliding the last bale into place with easy rhythm. She looked up at him, shielding her eyes with her wrist. You planning to stay up there all day? He swung down slow, boots landing in the dust beside her. Only if you're bringing supper. She stepped back, brushing straw from her sleeves. I was thinking stew and cornbread. But if you're set on eating dust, I won't stop you. Zeke grinned, the expression quiet and full. Stew sounds better. They walked side by side toward the main house, the heat easing off the land now, light softening over the fields. Mrs. McCallum, who'd returned from her sister's the week before, had taken to watching Gracelyn from the porch some evenings, her eyes distant but not unkind. Today, she nodded once in passing and said, Good hands make a good home. Gracelyn had nodded back, the words settling somewhere deep. In the kitchen, she stirred the stew while Zeke chopped wood out back. The rhythm of it, the scrape of his axe, the slow bubbling on the stove made something inside her settle. She set 2 plates on the table and pulled the bread from the oven, golden at the edges. When Zeke came in, he brought the smell of pine and sun with him. He washed at the basin and dried his hands on his trousers before sitting across from her. She passed him a bowl and they ate without rush. Afterward, Zeke leaned back in his chair, rubbed the back of his neck. Got a letter today, he said. From my brother out in Colorado, first I've heard in 3 years. She tilted her head. You close? Not anymore. He stayed when I left. We didn't agree on much after Pa passed. You think you'll write back? I already did, he said. Told him I'm not coming that way, told him I found something worth staying for. Gracelyn folded her hands in her lap. What did he say? He asked if I was sure. She looked at him long. Are you? Zeke stood and crossed to her, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. Yes. She reached up, covering his fingers with hers. That night they walked out past the barn, past the stacked stone wall where the prairie opened wide. A half-built fence marked the edge of the land McCallum had promised Zeke come spring. Gracelyn stood beside one of the posts, running her hand along the grain. This'll be ours, she asked. Ours, he said. I figure we build it slow, just what we need, nothing fancy. She smiled without showing teeth. Fancy never held much for me. Zeke reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of cloth. Inside it lay a simple silver ring, worn but clean. This was my mother's, he said. She didn't have much, but she had this when she married Pa. I've been keeping it for the right time. Gracelyn looked down at it, then up at him. You want to give it to me? I want you to wear it because you want to, not because you feel you owe me anything. She took it and slid it on her finger. It fits snug and cool against her skin. I want to. Zeke cupped her face in his hand, rough thumb brushing her cheekbone. Then that's all I need. They stood beneath the open sky, the stars just beginning to show, and kissed slow like neither of them had anywhere else to be. By late October, the cabin had its foundation and 2 walls, and Gracelyn had sewn curtains from old flour sacks dyed with beet and onion skin. McCallum gave them a week to finish before winter took hold, and the ranch hands pitched in on the roof. Mavis gave them a cast iron stove from the storehouse. Gracelyn moved into the cabin the day the chimney was set. That night, she and Zeke sat on the floor with stew in tin bowls and a blanket over their legs. The fire crackled steady and the wind hissed against the logs, but inside, it was warm. "You ever think you'd have this?" Zeke asked. She shook her head. "I stopped believing in things like this a long time ago." He pulled her close, kissed her temple. "Then we'll just keep proving it real." She leaned into him, rested her head on his chest. Every day. In the years that followed, the cabin grew sturdier. A second room was added after the first spring thaw. Gracelyn planted marigolds along the porch and Zeke taught her to mend bridles. They worked side by side without fuss, their quiet joined rhythm shaping each day. They had their quarrels about fence lines and firewood, about whether to trade for a milk cow